warrants and something should be looked at. So after discussions with Parks and Recreations and a meeting that I think Jerry attended.
I'm wondering if we should, before we do that though, if we should have them in here.
Well,
so then policy has a little bit better, right, you know, some specific, because see the specifics of what they're asking for. I know Cliff might.
The driver behind this is obviously the advertising and the track and field.
Right.
And the Parks and Recreation, so the town administrator asked council for an interpretation and so forth. They did that, and you know, we went through and looked at it, and basically, I think in my review of it, I disagreed with the interpretation of both town council and our council, in that it in fact says advertising right in our document, one of the documents of reference. But in addition to that, town council and our council, who basically agreed on the issue, made a comment about checking with the sign bylaw. Well, I just happened to catch on that today, and I said,
You mean the town sign, town sign?
Town bylaw, yeah. We have a sign bylaw
right.
as a part of the zoning bylaw. And as I went through that, what they would like to put up for advertising is described in the definitions under billboard, which and it says an off-premises sign owned by a person, corporation, or other entity that engages in the business of selling the advertising space on that sign, and that it's subject to the provision of Mass General laws. And it specifically aims at signs which are not for the premises. In other words, when you rent signs away from the premises, that constitutes basically a billboard by definition. And our sign bylaw only allows signs which are related to the business on the property. So basically what they would like to do is not legal according to the
Well, that would mean they'd have to take all those signs down though from the baseball fields. I question that.
One
well,
interpretation.
You can question it, but the fact is that it's in the bylaw.
But what I'd like to do, if we can, is work this out without being adversarial.
Yeah, no, I would
so
too.
that we can work with Parks and Rec like we've done in the past for the turf field and for the tennis courts and work these things out. I think it would be better for everybody involved.
But that's what I'm saying.
If we could leave the lawyers out of it, Cliff.
Yeah, but it's
I
not
less
work for Jerry.
I appreciate that, but the fact is that they basically, it's a moot point from our standpoint.
I disagree. I disagree 100%. It's not a moot point.
I would suggest,
I don't care it's not a billboard. I disagree 100%. It's not a moot point.
Well, regardless, you know, I mean, I'm not an attorney, so listening to that, you know, I would want someone to review it and tell me exactly what our restrictions are. But the issue at hand, there's several different issues going on. One is the process by which we discuss this and make decisions about how to interpret our own policy and apply it. And the policy subcommittee, we briefly spoke about it in our last public meeting, which the topic of that meeting was not advertising. We could have a discussion about this, but I would prefer to see Parks and Recreation work with us, talk with us in a public venue where we just hash this out so that we all have the same understanding, and it's done in a collegial manner. You know, once we start pulling out our bylaws, which I think is important for us to do, I think we lose sight of what was done with the memorandum of understanding.
Yeah, it would be a lot easier to collaborate, work together, sit down and meet before everybody jumps off on something like this. And I wish, you know, we had done that to begin this whole process rather than get to the point where.
I agree, but I also feel that we can't write a policy because a group or a person has made a request. We can't write the policy to fit that request. We have to consider advertising in schools and on school property as a policy question. And if we're going to have a hearing and allow public input, we have to allow people that disagree with advertising, not not just on school property, but also in the proximity to the center of town. So I want input. I think we have to consider all the parties, but I don't wanna say we're just gonna work with Parks and Rec on just this one particular field. You know, if we wanna write a policy that pertains just to that field, that's different. But our policy applies to all schools, so if we talk about changing advertising, it could start to appear not just on that fence, but on the fence at the Hood School baseball.
Well,
field.
and
But it's
that's
different,
not our
it's
field
different,
anymore.
it's different.
Yeah.
The policy applies to
Well,
school
that's what
property.
I'm-
The issue is going to become whether or not that facility is still school property or whether or not
Right.
it's under the control of somebody else. So
Right.
that, there are
But the
kind of two different
agreement links
issues
it
there.
back to.
Well, that's going to be, if it gets to the legal aspects of it, that's going to be the argument.
All right,
You know,
so.
who has control over the final say over the advertising. So that's why, in this particular case, I think our policy covers other school properties.
Yeah, I would agree with Jerry. I
Right.
mean, I don't think that we need to refer this to the policy subcommittee. I think we need to talk about advertising because I think it's an important topic, but not related to this particular thing. This is a very singular event. This came to us from a very specific vantage point from an individual, and we can work this out in a different manner. There are I have about 10 other topics that we could consider in the policy subcommittee arena. The top one being, of course, behavior-related things in the high school, middle school, and our social media and using networking policies around that. So we have a lot of things that I think are more salient to what the issues really are going on in the district. This is not one of them, and I think we could use another means to fix it. Our policy is sufficient.
Well, one thing to point out in that, the legal thing that Cliff referred to, the legal ruling by both town council and our council, pretty much, we didn't get an official ruling, but they pretty much went along with what the town council said on our policy. It gives the superintendent sign-off on any signs, even at the turf field.
Yeah, but
So the superintendent can sit there and just say no, and then it's done. I don't want that to, see, I know
Yeah,
Cliff and I differ
superintendent's
100%.
gonna work on the
We're
clause.
180 degrees opposite on this. I don't want that to be the way we work this, because then it gets into the superintendent's, you know, it becomes a superintendent's issue, and I don't want the superintendent to have an adversarial relationship with Parks and Rec.
Well,
Which
worse
could-
with
which-
us.
Or with us, well.
Yeah, because we write the policies, the
Well, what I'm basically telling you is that based on my brief run of the town bylaw this afternoon, because there was a line in here that says specifically, in defining such guidelines, you should also keep in mind any signage restrictions of the town zoning bylaw. And it sort of suddenly hit me that we have a pretty comprehensive sign bylaw within our zoning bylaw. And so I went on the website and pulled down Article 14 of the zoning bylaw, which is signs. And as I read through it, it's very clear that off-premises signs are not allowed for advertising. You just can't do it according to the zoning bylaw. And they are basically defined as billboards, even though you're picturing a giant thing up on the highway, you know, that's huge, but that is not the purpose, or not the description or the definition that is in the bylaw, which is defining what is being proposed as an off-premises advertising, which is by its definition in our zoning bylaw, a billboard.
Yes,
And therefore, I know that's an inflammatory term, but it's what's in our bylaw. And so it is not up to us to make that determination. It is beyond us and beyond our superintendent, has nothing to do with us, basically. It's a town bylaw. Now, I suppose that somebody could put a warrant article up for consideration that allows off-premises advertising, which is basically inviting billboards. So you're going to be caught betwixt and between on it. And it's not a matter of us working with Parks and Recreation or anyone else to deal with our policy. It's simply a matter that the town zoning bylaw says you can't do it, folks.
Well,
Well,
let's.
So
yeah,
they
we
should
need to
have
get-
read the rest of the opinion, which at the end says, oh, by the way, you really ought to look into the zoning bylaw.
I think it would have been part of the opinion.
Well, I'll ask again as to
It should
how,
have been brought up at the beginning.
how
and
does the
should have
Little
been-
League field have all those signs, Cliff? You
Well,
explain that
I
to me.
guess they
Because
just-
nobody sees them
no
down
one's
there,
seen
they're
it.
tucked away.
So, just for the,
That violates the law, Cliff.
Well,
Well, it must.
well, if it was there before the zoning bylaw, it was grandfathered. That's why we still have some billboards on Route 28, because they were grandfathered in.
Well, I'm guessing a lot of Little League signs are, they're grandfathered in the sense that they've been there since 88 or 89. But
That law might be
I'm sure
older
there's
than
new,
that.
but I'm sure there's new signs coming in all the time.
Right.
Every year, every single year.
And I guess I just want to say that I think, based on some input I got, that this is something that we ought to consider. And if Parks and Recs finds out they can't do it, then they can't do it. But there's a tremendous amount of money potential to be raised by putting signs up, and
But the issue, Mel, is the process, okay?
Right.
Parks and Rec can't just come charging
No,
in
right.
and say, oh,
That's
this
why
is what
I
we're
want
gonna
them
do.
here to
We need-
meet.
Exactly, all right, so that's the issue. I think.
yeah.
And the process leads us back to a policy, and our policy says that the superintendent needs to approve it.
Right.
But the superintendents, they look to our policy guidelines for their decision-making, and the policy guidelines clearly say, no. It says corporate sponsorship for a limited amount of time for a specific purpose. Yes.
well, can we talk about the main issue that was brought up for the community, because they probably have no clue what we're talking about.
Well, actually, I'm not.
I'm not sure what we can say, but, you know, a lot of this has to do with restricting types of advertising, because no one wants to see a school sign up, you know, at some kind of sporting event that advocates something that has a negative, potential negative influence on young people. That is the issue here. That is why we're talking about this. And I don't think anybody's against community engagement. I think it's important to engage businesses in sponsoring certain events. We have lots of donations made by businesses, particularly for our sports teams and getting us equipment and uniforms and books and things like that. And that is very important to preserve, being able to do that. But I want to make sure that really the process is the focus of what we're doing. Because I don't want to see this catapulted to, well, I have the right and control versus you have the right and control. That is not how we do things in North Reading. It shouldn't be a precedent that we want to set. So you know, if you would like to refer something to the policy subcommittee, you're probably going to get the same answer from me and Cliff, which is our policy is sufficient, the execution of this is poor, and we would need to go back and see whether or not, in fact, our policy is in violation of law. I mean, I don't think so.
No, I think it
No, I
supports
think
the
the
bylaw.
policy, the policy is support, the bylaw, the policy is supported in the rulings that are, and the interpretations we got from the attorneys. I guess the one thing I would ask, you know, regarding the issue that Cliff raised, should you contact Parks and Rec and say, you ought to check with the town to see if you can even do this? Because if
Well,
Cliff's right,
definitely.
then why should we even
I'll
go
let
through
Rita know
having them
that
in
tomorrow.
here,
Well,
et cetera?
That's an avenue.
I think that the chair should probably do that.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Yeah, I'll definitely contact Rita
Because
tomorrow.
if they can't do it, then we shouldn't even go through having the meeting.
Or it's a blockade that, you
Right.
know, but, you know, there's still the greater question, and Karen hit on it, that we haven't been able to answer. What are the legal parameters that we would have to act within if you were to allow advertising? Can you legally say no to certain types of advertising?
Yeah, well, their lawyer said we could.
I'd say, yeah, I don't know why you
Yeah.
couldn't, Sean. I mean,
And-
it's,
and you- when you want-
we have the right to not
We
accept
accepted
that. Why
it,
would we have to accept
Right.
it?
It's
you know?
not, I mean, I find that it would be easy to say no to alcohol, tobacco, we've got nutrition programs, so junk food, you know, no to politics, no to religious signs, no
Right.
to signs that some people would consider offensive, but others might not. So
Beauty in the eye of the beholder.
you absolutely need to write something that if you think the committee would move forward with advertising, would be the parameters that we would all agree to
But
work
it
with.
still goes back to the same thing, it's moot if the town doesn't allow it.
Yes,
So
yes,
if the town doesn't
yes.
allow it.
Well,
then
in the
it's
spirit of
That's
trying to be
basically what I
open-minded.
determined this afternoon, is that it
Well,
is
that's
in
why
fact-
I think,
Okay.
I think Mrs. Vaca should go back to them and say, look, there's this bylaw, you need to,
Read what was in the
Right.
opinion.
Right.
All the way down the bottom.
Well, let's
It
get an
most
interpretation of the
likely-
bylaw,
right.
and then we can make a decision with the next steps.
Right.
okay.
And I still think that it's somewhere at the next step or the step afterwards, you need to get